Hi, I'm Tammy. So maybe you thought about owning a waterfront home on Lake Hartwell and you thought, hey, are there any special considerations? Maybe you wondered, do I really want to live on a lake where someone else can control it? And what are they controlling and why are they controlling it? Well, if any of these questions have popped into your mind, stay tuned. You need to hear this about owning a property on Lake Hartwell. All right, so you're thinking, wait, I have to have all these trees. How on earth am I going to be able to see the water? So you see this guy back here? So from the ground up to here, we don't see any limbs. That is called limbing up a tree, cutting the limbs off, right? And you're able to do that up to 18 feet as long as it's 1/3 of the tree. So, if the tree's a lot shorter, you can obviously only limb up so far, but the maximum is 18 feet, but it also has to be only 1/3 of the tree. So you are able to do that. Now, you might have really small trees, you might have more trees, and so you may not be able to do that depending upon the shape of your property and what the Corps says, but that is one way you're able to see the water. Now, does that mean that some homes cannot see the water? What might impact that if you're looking for a home on Lake Hartwell and the view is important to you? Well, a couple things. One, the topography. How steep is the lot? We'll come back to that in a second. Number two, how dense are the woods and how close is the core line? Now, we say close core line. What we're talking about is the position of the home and how close the home is to the water, and then where is the core line? Because if the core line is way close to the house, well, you might have to have super dense woods all the way to the water. So even if you're limbing up these trees, it's really going to take away from the view. Whereas if the house is allowed to be closer to the water because it has what's known as a shorter core line, then obviously you're going to be better positioned for success if you want to see the water. Now, what does that also mean? From a real estate perspective, view is everything. So on Lake Hartwell, if you have a view like this with your property, it's going to be more expensive. Why? Because you can't just get this. It may not be approved anywhere else on the lake. It will. These things happen over and over again on the lake, but we don't have as many of these opportunities available. Okay, the other big thing for this particular property, you can't tell this right now, or it looks like this, but a lot of times video, you can't tell. It is pretty level down to the water. It's a short distance to the water and it's pretty level, and that is rare. A lot of times the steeper the topography, the deeper the water. So usually when you see level, you think, ooh, we might have a water level issue with regard to depth. This particular property, the water is still deep. Now, we're in what's known as a lower level time right now. They have let some water out of the lake. That's traditional for this time of year, so it doesn't look like the water levels are super high. They are not. And pop quiz later, what we consider to be sea level or full pool is 660 feet, okay? So today we're down about 7 feet from where we typically are, okay? And we typically see the higher levels during peak seasons like the summertime. Now, why does the water depth matter? Where you're like, of course, Tammy, it matters because boats, right? You want to have water if your property is waterfront, but it's a bigger deal on Lake Hartwell, and it's hyper important that you use a Lake Hartwell agent. I'm not selling Lake Hartwell agents, but this is king, and I'm going to tell you a really sad story about a client in just a moment. So, because the Corps controls the water levels, they are going to control the water levels based upon whatever is necessary to take care of this natural resource, power, and all the other things they're trying to accomplish. Our recreation and fun is second for them, okay? That is not a first priority. And actually, more than a decade ago, we had a really severe drought locally. What we found is the water levels dropped significantly. Now, when I say significantly, there were Lake Hartwell waterfront home owners that had no water, and it wasn't just for 6 months or a year. It was in some cases for a few years. In fact, I remember being on the road one day. I get this call. I was wrapping up my appointments, and this lady says, "Hey, Tammy, we Googled your name, wanted to see if you could list." I don't think they Googled then. This is more than a decade ago. They probably binged my name or Yahoo'd my name. And they said, "We see you're an agent here on Lake Hartwell. We have a property. We're only in town for a couple more hours. We have this vacation home. Can you come look at it? We want to get it on the market." So I look at my schedule. I have a few minutes. I'm like, yeah, I'll pop by. No time to research, but in my brain, I'm going to see a waterfront home. So I pull up in the driveway, and it looks like they have this massive backyard, a little overgrown, but it's huge, lush green, whatever. And in my brain, I thought, I could have sworn they said waterfront property. But I didn't think anything about it. I walk inside the home. So we're chatting about the home. They're telling me they bought this home. They're not from here. It was a second home for them. They live in Florida. And she pulls out these pictures. And at first, I don't really know what she's showing me. It's like kids on skis and a really nice boat, and they're clearly on the water. And I'm like, oh, it must be her family. And she's like, so this is our waterfront property. And the first thing I thought was, are we going to it? Like, are we leaving here? And I misunderstood what was occurring. And then as I looked more closely, I recognized the dock, and I noticed some things that were on the core line. I realized that was the house I was at, but it didn't have any of that water anymore. Ironically, that was also during the housing crisis of 07, 8, 9. We know that went on for a while. So I had that listing for several years. I actually helped them lease it. What's very interesting is I don't typically get to follow a property for a very long time, but in the whole 7 years they leased this property, no water until very recently. Now, why do I tell you this? One, if you're going to buy a waterfront home, you want to make sure that you have water if that's important to you, okay? The other reason it's important is if you're buying a waterfront home, you're paying a premium. If you were to pick this home up and put it someplace else without any water, it would not have the price tag that it carries today. So especially if you're not local, or if you are, but you've never really researched Lake Hartwell, having an agent who knows how to study and research the historical water levels back to when we had a drought, back to when we saw kind of the worst case scenario, you want to have that agent research for you to ensure that you are always going to have water. I guess something crazy could happen. They could basically dry up the lake. But in theory, during a really extreme drought or things that we have seen before, you want to ensure that you're going to still have water, one, for your own recreation fund and use, but number two, let's say you needed to sell that property. The worst thing for that seller that I was telling you about is when they bought it and they were not from this area, the seller listed it like a waterfront property price. And they bought it for a waterfront property price. And when they wanted to sell it, nobody wanted to buy it. And that's why they had to rent it, because they wanted the same waterfront property price they had paid. Well, everyone else looked at it and said, it's not waterfront. I don't want to pay a waterfront price for just a regular old house with a big marshy backyard. Maybe there's potential, but we don't know if or when. So finding the right topography is important, even for your own body. I have some buyers who say, hey, I don't want to go up a bunch of stairs. If you make stairs, or different paths that you might create, I don't want to have a serpentine path down to the water. I want it to be gradual. So finding a gradual lot is a really big deal. There's more money involved with that. Finding something with good water is a really big deal. Also, where is it on the lake? Let's say you have one of these massive boats. You want to make sure that with our bridge system, the size of your boat will fit under all of the bridges if you should want to get to the marina or other parts of the lake. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about this natural resource and what they do. The Corps of Engineers is not trying to take away any of your fund, but they're just trying to protect up until you hit their property, and then they say, let's make sure we protect this resource. Here are the things they will allow you to do. You can have an upgrade like a cart path. So for your golf cart, it can't be more than 6 feet wide. They would approve it, and you do have to have it painted a specific color. There's a couple of options that you have. And then you can have power at your dock. So maybe you want to have a boat lift or something like that, or pressure washing or things like that available at your boat dock. You can have water. So if you want to have water at your dock, whether it is for a pump or anything else you may have, and then the dock itself. Now, if you're approved for a dock, each of these things I mentioned carry their own permit. So I mentioned underbrushing, the ability to clear. Now keep it natural, but that's a permit. The ability to have a walkway, we call it improved walkway, that's a permit. The ability to have power, that's a permit. The ability to have water, that's an applied for permit. And then the ability to have a dock. Now, most important thing to remember, there's all kinds of things about docks. At the end of the day, the Corps of Engineers is going to tell you how big it can be and where it has to be placed, okay? On Lake Hartwell, minimally, all docks have to be 50 feet apart. Now, I'm about to toss in a bonus tip. If you have owned a property on Lake Hartwell for a while, maybe it's a lot and you thought, I'm going to build one day in the future. And you know that at one point in time you researched and you heard, hey, I'm approved for a lot. Sorry, I'm approved for a permit. Permits are not lifetime. You have to renew every 5 years. And even if you were approved in the past, it is possible you would not have approval in the future. Let me tell you a couple of scenarios I've seen. I've had someone who had an approved permit, and then they did not put the dock out there at the time. Somebody else bought a couple of properties beside them. They were originally one big parcel with one dock permit. They subdivided them. They were approved for a dock permit. Those people built on that. Well, now that dock had an approved permit and it was there first. And unfortunately, these other people, their dock was not the minimum of 50 feet away. So then their permit was not approved when they went to build later. So super important, the dock distance. There's all kinds of things that you do when you buy a waterfront property. I won't bog you down with that, but certain properties require what's known as a 90-degree projection survey. And that's really for docks that are sometimes closer together. The Corps may say you need to have one of these so we can make sure. You might have to turn your dock. You might be able to push it out. They have requirements on how it can be placed on the property. And then how big the dock can be, if it can have a double slip, if it can be multiple tiers, if it can have a roof on it. And then the big thing, the length of the gang walk. So the gang walk is kind of you walk the plank down to your dock. Maximum length is 60 feet. So these are not things you need to worry about today, but really when you are researching a property on Lake Hartwell, you're looking at a variety of factors. So if the water is more shallow or you're in a cove, you're gonna want to hopefully be approved for a longer gang walk so we can do what's called chasing water, where you push the dock out. Also, you wanna kind of see your proximity to other docks because that could have a future impact, but even currently, maybe you can't chase water as much because you might bump into another dock and not be able to keep that 50 feet of distance. You can also do what's known as shoreline stabilization. This property doesn't need it, but basically creating a seawall using something called riprap. People call it all kinds of things around here, but using rocks or other things to be able to stabilize the wall so there's no eroding. This property, again, doesn't need it, but lots of them do, especially if you're on a point on Lake Hartwell. Okay, so let's take a tour and look at just a couple of things and talk about how you know how to use your property. Okay, so as you are beginning your trek down to the water, you're going to begin to surveil the property for a tree with markings. So on this property, here's the first one that we spot. It's got 2 lines on it. So this tells us that this is where the core line begins. So from here and then straight across, we're gonna find another tree soon, and it's going to have similar markings. And what that means is from everything from that tree up is this person's property, and they can do with it whatever they want. But the space from this tree to the water belongs to the Corps of Engineers, so there will be some limitations. So it may not be highly visible here, but this is painted concrete. There are a few colors you can have. You don't have to have a cart path. It could be something more natural as well. However, if you want to apply for a permit for a cart path, you can do that. People do that for a variety of reasons, just for ease down to the water. Or if you do have a property with really steep topography, sometimes it helps to have steps or to have a cart path, or sometimes to even do what's known as a serpentine path, which is kind of snake shaped, and that helps as well to be able to navigate to the water. This particular property was approved for a light pole, power, and water. So you'll be able to see all of these things down here as well. Now, as you notice, there is dry ground. I mentioned that the water was not at full pool today. And so as you can see right here, the dock has the ability to go in and out. Now you can do that yourself. There are also service providers that will take your dock in closer to land or push it out further towards water. And they'll do that for you, usually for less than $100 a month. But they'll be able to do that with your dock to make sure that it never hits dry land. The reason you see more sand here is when the pool is higher during the summer in particular, the water will come up quite a bit, and actually the dock will also come up as well. It really comes to meet the pavers here. All right, so we are officially walking the plank. This is what I referred to as the gang walk, and again, the length of this is determined by the Army Corps of Engineers. The max length here would be 60 feet. You do have to have an approval for a lift, and basically the lift counts into the total square footage of space that a dock is permitted to take up with your approval. So depending upon your experience with the lake, you may not know this, but this is considered a relatively short core line with close access to the home. Obviously, you can tell for this particular property, there are not a lot of trees near the water nor at the house. So they have really good visibility both from the water and also from the house. As one of the largest recreational lakes in the Southeast, Lake Hartwell has over 960 feet of shoreline. There's also 6 counties it encompasses and 2 states. If you didn't know, Lake Hartwell is shared by both South Carolina and Georgia. In fact, this property, the water that's closest to me is on the South Carolina side, and way over there in those trees, that is the Georgia side of the lake. So lots and lots of properties, over 1,100 properties to consider if you want to be a property owner here. Now, there's a couple things you need to know about zoning as well. If you've heard red zone, yellow zone, green zone, what do they mean? Especially if having use of the water is important to you, you really want to know about the zoning. Now, let's say you just want a pretty view of the water. You never want to use it. In fact, you don't want to deal with the maintenance. You don't even care if you can see it all the time, but you just like being near nature. Then you would be a candidate for someone who might consider a red zone property. You can do absolutely nothing. You cannot underbrush. You will not get approved for any permits. And I guess you could hop off the land and swim, but that is it. Next, you'll find yellow zoning. Yellow zoning is pretty much the same as red zoning. However, you can have some limited use. No permanent improvements are allowed, but you could beach a boat for a short period of time. You could beach a kayak. You could beach a jet ski, but again, it's beaching it. You could not store it there. Green zone is max capacity. Now again, that doesn't mean you get approval for every permit. It doesn't mean you get approval for a max dock size. And in fact, you can actually be green zoned and not get approved for a dock permit. It is rare, but it can occur. So that's why the next step is always to talk to an Army Ranger, the ones assigned to that part of the lake, so that you can vet that out. But it's a really incredible lake. It is so much fun. We are known for our fishing on this lake. It's tons of fun with power boats. You'll see lots of people out. We have incredible marinas and great water restaurants and so much to see and explore. So if you've been thinking about a home on Lake Hartwell, let's chat a little bit more about your goals and specifics to see if this lake could be a great fit for you.